Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are taking an early access look at an aircraft which I'm sure for many of you needs absolutely no introduction. In front of us we have the DC Designs F14 A Tomcat. The aircraft will be releasing in about a week's time, and Just Flight were kind enough to give us a G-suit and a few £1,000s of fuel to burn. So in today's video we're going to take the DC Designs F14 for a bit of a tear up and see what the aircraft is all about. I will just start the video by stating that the F14 Tomcat is not a study level aircraft, nor does it pretend to be. DC Designs do state that this is their most complex product to date, but don't be expecting anything on a par with the DCS version of the F14. To my mind, this product is really aimed at the quote-unquote average simmer. It's certainly good fun and it does have a little bit of functionality there, but overall it's one of those aircraft where you're much more likely to jump in fairly quickly and get up in the air. As usual, I'll run through all of the startup procedures as per the DC Designs checklist so that you can really get a feel for the level of fidelity that has been modelled. As I say though, to my mind this product is really all about having fun and we'll be previewing it as such. The product is still early access, so there may well be some bugs and issues that need fixing up before the final release. I might point some of those out as we go, but I won't spend too much time focusing on those issues for now, again since the product is early access. Anyway, for today's flight, as you'll have seen, we've just left the deck of our carrier. We're now headed southeastbound out towards the Mojave Desert. We're going to take the aircraft initially down to China Lake Naval Air Station. We'll top up our tanks on the ground there, and then we're going to be taking the aircraft for a run around the Sidewinder Route. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Sidewinder Route, and I'm not particularly familiar with it myself, but it's the US equivalent of the Mach Loop. It's a low-level, high-speed flight training area. Of course, being American, the Sidewinder Route is on a far grander scale than the Mach Loop. The entire distance of the run is somewhere in the order of 280 nautical miles. So we're going to cut the corner a little bit today, taking in some of the more famous parts of the route. We'll be flying the Jedi Transition and heading down Star Wars Canyon. It's actually my first time in the area, so I'm quite looking forward to seeing it. It certainly sounds good fun. Once we've finished our run around the route, we'll head back towards China Lake. If we need to, we'll top the aircraft up again, otherwise we'll head straight back to the carrier. As always guys, I do hope you enjoy the video. If you do, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If you have any comments or questions for me, you can leave those down in the comments section below. As I say, we'll run through a full startup of the aircraft as per the DC Designs checklists, so we'll now head for the cockpit of the aircraft on the ground in China Lake. Okay, so we're now on the ground at China Lake Naval Air Station in our F14 A Tomcat. As I say, the aircraft is not study level, so I think the best way to give you a feel for the level of fidelity is to run through the full startup process as per the checklist provided by DC Designs. So the start checks, the canopy is open, landing gear lever is down, park brake is on, battery can come on. Worth noting the real aircraft doesn't actually have a battery or an APU, but again a concession for the sim, DC Designs have given us the battery. Avionics can come on, and we'll get the HUD master on as well. Wing sweep we'll set to manual, and the wings can come back to the oversweep position for now. We'll get the anti-collision light on. Fuel valves are closed. Again, I think this is a little bit inaccurate, I could be wrong. Anyway, they're the fuel valves on the aircraft in the sim. Inlet ramps are set to auto. Throttles are both closed. GPU switch is on. Again, not fitted to the real aircraft, but a little concession made there. And we are ready for the left engine start, so we'll set that to the start position. We'll monitor the engine as it runs up. Overall, I think the start sounds and the engine sounds in general on the aircraft are quite nice. Just keep an eye on the speed tape. To my mind, the speed tape looks a little bit unusual there at the moment. Usually you'd see the tape come up all the way from the bottom of the gauge. So that might be a little bug that needs fixing there. So overall the engine starts quite good. It happens at a very reasonable rate. The only slight negative there is there's a bit of a jump last minute, as you'll see in just a moment's time. So you see the engine rockets into life there at the very end of the cycle, which I can't imagine is realistic. And similarly the RPM there, it's pinned at 100% even when idling. I imagine that's not correct. Turbine in-stage temperature looks a bit high there as well. Anyway, we do have a good start on the left engine, so we'll get the GPU switch off. And we can now start the right-hand engine. So same as before, the engine will slowly spool up. You can see the RPM increasing there. Oil pressure's coming up as well. We have a rise in fuel flow. So we should start to see that TIT increase shortly. Anyway, engine parameters are checked. We are now ready for the taxi, so we'll get the canopy closed up. Overall, I think the sounds of the aircraft are pretty nice. Most effects are there where you'd expect to hear them. Park brake can come off. We're just down from the holding point of runway 14, so we'll taxi over and hold short, carry out the rest of our checks before we depart. And we're all clear on the left. Overall the aircraft actually taxis rather nicely, I have to say. The nose wheel steering is very responsive at low speed. It's more than enough to get you around on the deck of a carrier, but at high speed you do lose that nose wheel steering, so you have to be careful and monitor your speed during the taxi. And overall the aircraft just feels quite plausible in terms of ground handling. It's certainly very easy, very pleasant to taxi. So as I say, we'll just bring ourselves up to the holding points, bring the aircraft to a stop, park brake can go on, and the before takeoff checks, landing light is on. Worth noting as well, some of the switches don't actually match up in terms of how they're labelled versus the cockpit tooltip. So for example here the DC Designs checklist calls for the landing light on, and according to the tooltip this is in fact the landing light. We'll get the position lights on. We don't need the Ollie O'Neill switch as we're taking off from land today. Wing sweep. We'll set that back to auto. Just wait for the wings to fully extend. And they are now fully extended. AFCS is engaged. DLC is disarmed. Flaps. We'll just go with the 2 stages of flaps for the takeoff. We've got plenty of runway. And the flaps are extended. Elevator trim is set. So for the takeoff, as I understand it, the F-14 A is rather an underpowered aircraft, so we'll be using full afterburner as well for the takeoff. We won't be using default air traffic. There's a bit of an issue with that at the moment in my sim. We are all clear on final though. Park brake can come off. Clear up wind as well. So we'll just get ourselves lined up on the runway. But as you can see, from cold and dark all the way up to being ready for takeoff, there's not too much to do in the F-14, Again, really showing it's not a study level aircraft, it's much more the case that it's probably one you'll hop in just to have a little bit of fun. But I think there is a nice balance for the average simmer between fidelity and simplicity. Okay, so we are pretty much set and ready to go. We'll get the HUD into the takeoff mode. We'll hold the aircraft on the brakes initially, come up to full military power. You can see we do have a helpful little prompt there on the bottom left of the HUD to show us which gate the throttle's in. Says full military power, feet off the brakes. Move the throttles into the afterburner detent. And we now have full afterburner. Just using a little bit of rudder to keep the aircraft on the centre line. The rudder is quite sensitive, but it's manageable. Anyways, 150 knots, we'll come back on the stick. And we have positive climb, we'll get the gear up. Flaps can come up as well. Now we'll just keep the afterburners in until we're through 300 knots. And we'll come back now to full military power. We'll start our turn out towards the west. Just passing over the town of Ridgecrest at the moment, so it's just out to the south of the Naval Air Station. And we'll pull a little bit of G as we come through the turn here, up to around 2 Gs at the moment. Just maintaining 300 knots for now. Looking for a heading of pretty much bang on 270. That takes out towards Lake Isabella, which is the first waypoint on the Sidewinder Route. Says 270. We'll get ourselves trimmed out just to put the aircraft in a slight climb. Anyway, more about the aircraft in terms of how it handles. On the takeoff, as I say, the rudder is quite sensitive, but we know that's a bit of an issue in the sim, generally speaking, and as you can see, it was manageable overall. In terms of the aircraft's roll response, I think that feels really nice. The roll rate feels about right. And the aircraft does feel a little bit heavier in pitch than it does in roll. I suspect that may well be accurate to the real-world aircraft. The controls also get pretty heavy in pitch until you've got the aircraft trimmed out. Overall, I think the flight model feels very plausibly like an older series jet aircraft, where you do have that sort of mix between old school flight controls and newer fly-by-wire systems. In the case of the F-14, we've got the AFCS system. At the moment, the wings are still fully extended, but we'll deal with that very shortly. They're in the automatic mode at the moment. We'll just wait until we've passed over Lake Isabella, which is the first turning point on the Sidewinder Route, and then we'll get those afterburners back in and kick us north up the valley. I think the official starting point of the route is the dam, which is just out to the west of us, but we'll cut the corner here and fly up the eastern shore of the lake, or the reservoir. So we'll fly full afterburner all the way out to the north, and then as we cut eastbound through the Jedi Transition, we'll come back on the speed. We'll throw the aircraft around a little bit more at low speed just to see how the AFCS system handles that. Anyway, pointing now down into the valley that we're going to be heading north up, so we'll come into full afterburner once again. Get the aircraft pointing towards the ground. Just coming up on Mach 0.9 at the moment, so very soon we're going to be going supersonic. Interestingly, the aircraft does actually dip the nose down as we go transonic there, so I suspect maybe they've actually modelled a bit of Mach tuck in the DC Designs F14, which is really nice to see. Not seen that in any jets in the sim so far. As you can see now, the wings swept all the way back. Just coming up through 700 knots at the moment. Mach 1.1. Now we'll just wind our way through the valley. Certainly the controls feeling much heavier now that we're at high speeds. Needing quite a lot of backstick there to get the aircraft responding. And again, overall the flight model, it feels very plausible. Really having to use quite large deflections on the controls now to get the aircraft to respond, which I think is really just a way of modelling the controls feeling slightly heavier. So we've got full throttle, we're more or less doing about 750 knots, which translates into a speed of Mach 1.2 more or less. Obviously we're low level here at the moment. And just throwing the aircraft around a bit, again just to get a feel for the flight model. Tracking out towards waypoint 2, which is a small watchtower up on the side of the hills. I think in reality it's located on the hill just off the nose, but obviously it's not modelled in the sim. Once we reach waypoint 2, we'll track out to the northeast. Just coming up on waypoint 2 now. So just coming over the crest of the hill down into the valley now, you can see the lakes or the reservoirs just out in front of us. Once we pass over the lakes, that's where we cut through the Jedi Transition to the other side of the Sidewinder Route. So just coming back on the speed. Indicated airspeed rolling off there, as you can see. We'll pull a little bit of G as well just to bleed the speed off a bit more quickly, so up to about 3 Gs there. Keep an eye on the wings. You can see they do extend as the speed comes back. Now we'll get the speed back to around 400 knots. Just come back further on the stick. We'll see how many Gs we can pull. We're pretty heavy here at the moment. And you can see the AFCS limiting the amount of G we can pull. The aircraft does snap forward a little bit quickly there. I suspect that's not realistic. By the looks of it, we can basically pull up to about 6.5 G initially, which I think is correct for the aircraft at heavy weight. So again, I'm not that familiar with the aircraft, I'm certainly no expert, and One thing I will say about the aircraft, the manual is a little bit vague on some of the details, but overall the behaviour of the AFCS seems quite plausible. That's the maximum roll rate of the aircraft at our current speed. Anyway, we'll continue eastbound, heading out towards the Star Wars Canyon. Wing swept all the way back, just about to come up through Mach 1. Again, the nose dropping on us there, having to use quite a lot of backstick to avoid scraping the ground. So I think it is fair to say that Mach Tuck is modelled. That's an aerodynamic peculiarity that tends to affect a lot of high-speed aircraft in the transonic range. Basically, as you approach Mach 1, the nose feels like it wants to dip down. To me it feels like that's been modelled, and I think that's pretty impressive if it has. Certainly the first Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft I've come across where there's any sort of behaviour like that. And the aircraft does also model compressor stall on the engine. Similarly, you can put the aircraft into a flat spin, so again there's some fairly interesting aerodynamic peculiarities modelled on the DC Designs F14. We'll talk more about that later on when we wrap up the video. Anyway, we'll just continue to follow the road for now. That'll take us in towards Star Wars Canyon. And again, just pulling some G, up to around 4 Gs there at the moment. Come back on the thrust again. Let that speed bleed off. And you do have to be careful with the F-14. Again, with that AFCS, occasionally the aircraft won't let you do what you want. So you've got to be pretty careful how you fly it, preempt what you're doing. Otherwise, you might find yourself expecting to perform a certain rate of turn and the aircraft will just say no. Which ultimately, of course, is the same as a modern fly-by-wire aircraft, but this one does feel a bit more archaic in terms of how it flies. Anyway, we'll get those afterburners in again. We'll head southbound back towards China Lake. In terms of our fuel, looks like we've got about £13,200 on board at the moment. That's going to be enough to get us back towards the carrier, so we won't stop off at China Lake on the way home. We'll just, to shamelessly quote the movie, we'll go ballistic, head up to a reasonable cruising altitude, and head back home. So as you can see, we're on a nice long final here at the moment for the landing. We've got the gear down, the flaps are down, tail hooks extended. We've also got the direct lift control on. And as you can see, that is modelled on the aircraft. Anyway, we'll maintain around 125 knots down the approach. That's showing us just a little bit fast on the angle of attack indicator. We'll be using Kinetic Assistant to aid us in our recovery onto the deck. And getting my excuses out of the way a little bit ahead of time, but it does tend to bring you down with a bit of a bump. I'll try nonetheless to make it as smooth as I can. So we're down. Just come up on the power and clear the runway. Flaps can come up. We'll get the tail hook up as well. And wings can come back to manual. We'll put those back into the oversweep position, just to give us a little bit more wing clearance as we make our manoeuvre. We'll just swing the aircraft around. Once we've cleared the runway, we'll get the aircraft shut down. Back on the brakes, park brake can come on. And the shutdown checks. Park brake is set, landing light is off, nav lights are off, flaps are up. Inlet ramps, they can go to the stow position. Fuel valves are off. Again, quite nice shutdown sounds there. Anti-collision light is off. Avionics master can come off. We'll get the hub master off as well. And finally the battery master. Wings are in the oversweep position. Ladder can come down, and we'll get the canopy opened up. So there you go guys, I hope you enjoyed our outing in the DC Designs F14 A Tomcat. The package does actually come with the A and B variants included. Again, I think it's fair to say, and probably quite clear to the F14 aficionados amongst you, that the product is not a completely accurate representation of the aircraft. As I mentioned at the start of the video though, that's not really what DC Designs was aiming for with their F14 A and B. I think the product is supposed to strike a nice balance between fidelity and accessibility, and for me once again the DC Designs F14 is really an aircraft that you can jump in, get started up with relative ease, be in the air very quickly and have some really good fun. It does still certainly have some issues and bugs that need fixing at the moment, hopefully they'll be dealt with before release. But certainly, overall, the aircraft is much on a par with some of the other better jet aircraft that we've seen in the sim to date. Once again, guys, I do hope you enjoyed the F14 and our run around the Sidewinder Route. If you did, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel. If you have any comments or questions for me, you can leave those down in the comments section below, and I'll always do my best to answer them. And lastly, given recent events and the fact that we were looking at the F14 today, particularly given the variant that we were flying, I think it's worth making a quick mention of Dale Snodgrass's passing. For those of you who aren't familiar, Dale Snodgrass was a former United States naval aviator. You may have noticed that it was actually his aircraft that we were flying in the sim today. The man was a bit of an aviation legend. He's considered one of the greatest fighter pilots of all time. He accumulated more than 4,800 hours on the F14, more than 1,200 carrier landings, which is pretty phenomenal. He spent a large portion of his life in the skies, initially with the US Navy, and then ultimately going on to be one of only 10 USAF heritage pilots. He performed at some 850 air shows over the course of about 20 years, having flown not only the F-14 but also the F-86 Sabre, P-51 Mustang, F-4U Corsair, the T-6 Texan, the MiG-17, MiG-21, A-4 Skyhawk and the F-5 Tiger. So a career and a life that I'm sure many of us would dream of having. Unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago he was killed in an air crash at the age of 72. At least though, it was a life well spent doing something that I'm sure he absolutely loved. Anyway guys, I hope you all take good care of yourselves and I will see you all again soon.